Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. This is my belated November wrap-up, part 1, and I don't normally do it in 2 parts, but I had a strange reading month, and so I'm going to do fiction, and then I'll do another video for the non-fiction. So in November, I had my father was very unwell, and then he passed away towards the end of the month. And so during that time, I still was reading, but I had very little patience for fiction. So I started to find by the end of the month, I was really preferring non-fiction in the sense of just having a voice tell me stuff and talk to me instead of me having to go to the effort of investing in a fictional world, suspend disbelief, and believe in things that were made up, that I didn't have a lot of patience for that. So you'll see it all unraveling a bit in this fiction section where it starts off quite well and then it just falls apart. So the first book, which is excellent, was Nudibranch by Irenosen Okojie, and Annie and I picked this up partly because of the stunning cover and we just wanted to have it as an object in our homes, but the story Grace Jones won the AKO Kane Prize for African Writing, which is a short story prize, and so that's how it got onto our radar. So we did that on the podcast, and that story is exceptional, so I highly recommend it for Grace Jones alone, but all of the stories are really strong. Grace Jones, I don't want to really say too much about it because, as we found, talking about a short story, you can quickly give away spoilers because it's so short. It can lose the impact if we give too much away. But suffice to say, it's really poetic writing, but also very grounded in reality. And she balances that beautifully. So she'll do a sentence that'll take your breath away, but then ground it in, then Hassan called from the office or something really sensible that you can. So there's always, you always feel grounded, but it's a story that packs a real punch. And by the end of it, you want to go back and read it all again because everything takes on a different meaning. And I think that's the sign of a really good story. So very gripping, and all of her stories, that it's fresh, there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff in there, but again, the mastery of the writing is remarkable. So that is Nudibranch by Irenosen Okojie. So a very strong start. And then I started Islands of Mercy by Rose Tremain, and I love Rose Tremain. I really adored Restoration and Music and Silence. They're 2 of my favourites. I still haven't read the Gustav Sonata, but that's on my list. But I saw that this had come out and I picked it up, and immediately when I started reading it was swept away by her beautiful writing, and again just this very comforting sense of where you are. It's very realistic. It's the city of Bath in 1865, and it centres around the character of Jane, and she's a nurse, and then she meets, I think it's Valentine, and then it flips to Borneo with an eccentric British Rajah, Sir Ralph Savage. So in the beginning, I was completely hooked. I loved the scenes in the tea rooms and the conversations between the characters. And then I just lost interest. And what happened was Jane begins to have an affair, and I think it tells you this on the blurb, so it's not a spoiler, with a woman who she meets. I think she goes to Italy, and so I loved all of this escape to Europe and this fabulous, historical fiction, which is what I thought I really just felt like. But I just found that it lacked tension because she goes there, she meets this woman, they immediately start the affair, but there's no tension about it, or there sort of seems to be no barriers in her way or anything that keeps you in suspense. It just happens. And then the Borneo scenes I didn't love. I couldn't quite work out if it's from a colonial point of view or I wasn't sure about it. So, and then it didn't quite connect with the main story, which is Jane. And so I think it does sort of by the end, but even the reviews that I've read said that it didn't connect enough as it could have. So it didn't quite get there for me. But again, I really love her writing. So I'm still keen to read the Gustav Sonata. But this one I just didn't quite have the patience for. But as I say, it was a difficult month. So I'd love to know if you've read it and whether I was too quick to put it down. But that's Islands of Mercy. And then another one that I'm sorry to say didn't quite survive the tricky month was Outlaws by Javier Cercas, and this is translated from the Spanish by McLean. And again, really stunning writing. He is beautiful. He has really rhythmic prose and beautifully translated as well. And this centers on a character called Ignacio Cañas. So he's 16 and we meet him on a long hot summer where he gets swept up with a gang, particularly Zarko and Terry, a girl who he's infatuated with, and they meet in a pinball arcade and he starts hanging around with them and they hang out at the bars and the cafes and they go on a few delinquent crime escapades and so on. And Zarko goes on to become a celebrity criminal, I think, and then Cañas is a lawyer and is asked to defend him. Terry asks Cañas or Kanya, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but to defend him 30 years on. And so I was really intrigued by that premise of the legal case, but also potentially the conflict that he has having, when it's for a friend, it can be all sorts of trouble. But that had not yet happened by the time I'd got to sort of a third of the way through, and we were still in the long hot summer. And whilst it was really very beautifully done and everything rings true, the dialogue, the characters are wonderful, the bars and the sense of place in Girona, it all really is authentic. And I was enjoying it, but it just was moving quite slowly. And again, I'm sorry that I didn't have the patience. And so I put it down. I've had this on my shelf for a long time. So this is part of reading through my shelf. And I still really like his writing. So I think I'll try another book by him. And I may even go back to this when I have a bit more patience, because I think it is quite a masterfully written book, but I just put it down. So that was Outlaws by Javier Cercas, and it's translated by McLean. So please let me know if you've read it, what you thought. And then we have what is a real masterpiece, The Living Sea of Waking Dreams by Richard Flanagan. And I love his books. He's a wonderful Australian writer. I loved The Narrow Road to the Deep North, which won the Booker in 2014, I think it was. And I loved Wanting, which is one of his earlier books. He's really at the top of his game. This one didn't quite work for me, but I'm really interested to hear what other people think about it, because I think it's one of those books that will generate a lot of discussion. It's about a woman called Anna, and her mother is dying, and she has two siblings, and they all sort of come around the hospital bed and try to decide what to do, whether to keep her mother alive or whether they should just turn off the life support. And they decide to keep her alive. And then it sort of goes on from there. They have a dispute about it, but one of them says the time has come. The other two decide that they do want to keep her alive, and it goes on from there. The other thing that's happening with Anna is that she's missing her finger. She's missing a finger. Her finger has vanished. So there's a supernatural element here. It's handled superbly, I should add, because I don't get on with supernatural, but it is handled really well. It's woven into the story. A bit later on, her knee also disappears, and she somehow manages to get on with things and adapt to that. And she sort of makes a few inquiries with doctors, but what can you do? They they can't necessarily help her. And it's really interesting. There's also the dynamics with the siblings as well. And whilst all this is going on, the bushfires in Australia are happening. So it's very current, and that again is handled really well. There is some anger in that writing about that and about the urgency of our plight with climate change, which there's passion in Richard Flanagan's writing, which I like. But I read it as the missing finger as a metaphor for our sort of complacency and our ambivalence in the light of, what will it take for us to realise there's an emergency going on? And I think I sort of read it as a metaphor for the climate change situation and the fact that we'll see, for example, a glacier melting or a species become extinct or something like that, and we still don't really act, or there's still this complacency. So I just wonder, and that's why I think it's a good one for discussion. And because it's Richard Flanagan, all of that is done really, really well. But for me, it wasn't, I didn't love reading it in the way that I loved The Narrow Road to the Deep North or Wanting. Whether it was that I didn't believe in it or I didn't like the characters, they're quite unlikable, the siblings, or I didn't care because whether their mother sort of was still alive or not didn't seem to matter in a way, or I don't know, something, it seemed to me perhaps more about the issues and that all of that sort of world and the characters were created to sort of as a vehicle for the issues than the story itself. But again, as I say, it was at a time where I didn't have very much patience for any fiction at all. So that might explain it. But let me know. I have heard lots of people put this in their best books of the year. So I know that I'm sort of in the minority, and I do think it is a masterpiece at the same time as just not loving reading it. So it's an interesting conundrum, and that's The Living Sea of the Waking Dreams by Richard Flanagan. So that is it for the fiction. I'll do the non-fiction separately. Let me know what you've been reading, and if you have read any of those, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I will see you very soon. Bye.